In order for an economy to function well and to create opportunities for the poor, there needs to be a culture of trust, a culture that respects and encourages enterprise, that values the dignity of the person and the value of work. But markets don't create these things, and they're not the result of geography, and they're not accidental. They require a certain cultural and institutional framework to sustain them.
The most important type of capital is cultural capital. And by cultural capital, I don't mean just food and music and fashion and language. These are very valuable things. But I mean, how does a group of people attach meaning in their lives? Are they tolerant of people unlike themselves? Are they optimistic about the future? Do they believe in competition? It's trustful relationships, optimistic about the future, belief in competition and innovation, loving new ideas, loving the idea of serving the client, very, very well. This cultural capital tells you if the country has the conditions to be prosperous in the future.
I think a lot about what makes countries rich and what makes countries poor are mental models. It's how people conceive of themselves, how they conceive of why they are where they are. And I think there's a tendency in people and in politicians to have a narrative of self-pity, to have a narrative of victimhood, of I'm here because somebody did this to me. And I think changing that narrative is as important as everything else. Changing that sense of possibility and that it's up to me and what I can do to change my destiny is half of the battle. If I want change, I'm not defeatist. I can, roll up your sleeves and do something if you see something that doesn't work. Those are values that societies have, that societies learn, that help in this trajectory from poverty, a poverty of wealth and spirit, to a richness and a sense of wealth.
In my work on what actually creates wealth, I stress the virtue of thrift. And thrift, at its core, is about the delay of gratification. It's saying no to consuming things today for the sake of a better tomorrow. It's not just keeping cash under your mattress. It's about investing for the sake of tomorrow. And that seems to find endorsement in Jesus's parable of the talents. You remember that there's 3 servants, and 2 servants put that money to work and produced a return, and the master was pleased with it. But the 3rd servant was scared of the master, and his fear forced him to dig a hole in the ground and to put the money there, and it didn't grow. He, if you like, was a miser with his money. It was the safest thing for him to do, but it came from a fearful mindset. And the 2 entrepreneurs in the story have a view of God that is much more open and creative and is willing to take risks, like the risk of creating human beings at the start of the world.
We've talked a lot about market economies playing a key role in helping the poor. Now, this may surprise some people because we often think of markets as cutthroat competition among self-centered individuals. And this can and does happen. And so we need to be vigilant. But if a market is going to be sustainable in the long run, we need something very different from unconnected, self-seeking individuals. We need people who think of others and who are rooted in their families and communities. We need a moral culture and a measure of trust that extends beyond family and clan.
For example, there's a famous study done of southern Italy and why southern Italy compared to northern Italy was relatively backward. The research found that the major reason for this was that families in southern Italy were almost totally absorbed with themselves. They didn't trust anyone else outside the family, and everything they did was just for themselves. And of course, you can't have development without trust. You can't have the free exchange without having trust between people. Regulation can go so far, but it can never be a substitute for trust.
Trust can be diminished and trust can be increased. And we need to focus on what can happen to diminish trust and what can happen to build it up. And when we have a strong and vibrant civil society with robust churches, robust families, that will build trust up.
Another key element is respect. When we think about ways to deal with the challenge of poverty, initiatives that we want to support, how we want to make use of the resources that God has given us, we have to stop for a minute and think if these decisions are going to have an impact on the dignity and creativity of the very people that we're trying to help. Do they respect individuals, but not only individuals, also families, because we speak about the role of families for development, and it is huge, it's super important, and it is really sad when we look at initiatives and people that are providing resources to programs that undermine this very foundation.
All of this means that if we want to encourage human flourishing, we need to be careful that our charity doesn't usurp local responsibility or undermine a community's cultural capital.
I'll give you an example of the system that we are developing with Rick Warren. Rick Warren doesn't tell me what to do. He's a partner with me. He came here and he realized that what he was conceiving, I was doing it. And we became friends. And we are relating, therefore, he is bringing his Christians, his technicians, members of his church to come and relate with the Rwandan people. Rick Warren himself is coming to relate to the Rwandan churches, not to tell us what to do, but to learn with us what we can do to improve a given situation in this country. And we are investing in our ideas, and he's investing in his Western experience so that we can design together a plan to move from point A to point B, and from point B to point C. But we encourage our people to do it and develop the sense that our people can do it.
The issue of giving is a very difficult tension. We have been entrusted with a lot, and we want to be generous with that. In fact, Scripture tells us that we need to be generous with that. But when our generosity gets in the way of others becoming generous, when our stewardship gets in the way of others becoming good stewards, therein lies the problem.
Brett Elder has worked alongside pastors in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, spreading a message that each one of us is called to generous stewardship. This message had a remarkable impact in a village in the African nation of Uganda. Bishop John Hannington met Elder through the efforts of International Steward, an organization that fosters local giving to meet local needs. On his return from one of the workshops, Bishop Hannington resolved to apply this message of generosity in the most unlikely of circumstances.
In 2001, the ADF army overtook many regions of western Uganda, forcing over 80,000 survivors into the turmoil and destitution of refugee camps. After 2 miserable years in captivity, it was safe to return home to Bundibujo, only to find that all had been destroyed. But there was one who chose to inspire through generosity and gracious giving, and this is his story.
My name is Hannington Bahemuka, but most people call me Bishop Hannington. The houses had been torn down, the farms had nothing in them, churches had been demolished, schools were devastated.
The need seems too great, leaving the people asking the all too common question: how can the people from the West help us? However, Hannington inspired his people to ask a different question.
I asked, how soon can my people rise to the challenge of funding not only their immediate needs, but their futures as well? I told the people at that time that God has given us everything we need to rebuild our community. And what he needed was others to make themselves available to him, and he was going to use us. And those of us who are mechanics, those of us who are business people, they can use their gifts and the trade that they have to build their community.
We began to rebuild our churches, provided homes and schooling for the orphans, and the needs of the people were met.
The people understood that they needed to create wealth in order to allow for tangible generosity. By using their God-given gifts and resources they already possessed, a cycle of sustainability was established.
Children of the earth.
Tingisie kavo kandi tukwegua gantu agonjera kimwe korera ruhanga mukiaro engabani